Today, the United States dollar is one of the most powerful currencies on earth. It is used in international trade, held by central banks, accepted in countries around the globe, and trusted by billions of people every day. But the story of the dollar did not begin with wealth or global influence. It began in a collection of small British colonies struggling to survive. During the 1600s and early 1700s, there was no American currency. The colonies suffered from a constant shortage of British coins because most gold and silver flowed back to England. Without enough money, everyday business became difficult. Farmers traded crops for tools. Blacksmiths repaired wagons in exchange for food. Merchants often accepted tobacco, animal skins, or grain instead of cash. Foreign coins also circulated widely. The most trusted was the Spanish silver dollar, known as the Piece of Eight. Minted from rich silver mines in the Americas, it became one of the world's most respected coins. Ironically, the currency that would later inspire the American dollar came from Spain, not Britain. As the colonies grew larger and trade expanded, this confusing system became harder to manage. America needed a stable currency, but before that could happen, the colonies would first have to fight for something even more important: their independence. In 1775, the American colonies entered a war that would change history forever. The Revolutionary War had begun. But there was one major problem. Wars require money. The Continental Congress needed to pay soldiers, purchase muskets, buy food, manufacture gunpowder, and keep an army in the field. Yet the colonies had almost no gold or silver. Faced with an impossible financial challenge, Congress made a historic decision. Instead of minting coins, it would print paper money. The new currency became known as the Continental Dollar. For the first time, America attempted to create a national currency. At first, the plan appeared successful. Soldiers accepted the notes as wages. Merchants used them for trade. The government relied on them to finance the revolution. But there was a serious flaw. The notes were not backed by enough gold or silver. To pay for the growing costs of war, Congress printed more and more money. Soon, prices began to rise. Inflation spread rapidly across the colonies. Adding to the crisis, British agents secretly produced counterfeit continental dollars in an effort to weaken the American economy. As confidence disappeared, the currency lost almost all of its value. By the end of the war, many people refused to accept it. A new phrase entered the American vocabulary: not worth a continental. The first national currency had failed. Yet its failure taught the young nation one of the most important lessons in economic history. A successful currency depends on more than paper. It depends on trust. After winning independence in 1783, the United States faced another enormous challenge. How could a brand new nation build a financial system that the world would believe in? The answer would come from one remarkable founding father, Alexander Hamilton. When the Revolutionary War ended in 1783, the United States had achieved independence. But freedom came with a heavy price. The new nation was deeply in debt. Its economy was weak. Each state used different currencies. Foreign coins still circulated widely. There was no unified financial system. Many feared that the young republic might not survive. One man believed America needed more than political independence. It needed economic strength. His name was Alexander Hamilton. In 1789, President George Washington appointed Hamilton as the first Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton proposed an ambitious plan. The federal government would take responsibility for the nation's debts. It would strengthen public confidence. And most importantly, America would create a single national currency. On April 2, 1792, Congress passed the Coinage Act of 1792. The law established the United States Mint in Philadelphia and officially created the United States dollar. The name dollar was inspired by the trusted Spanish silver dollar, which had been widely used throughout the colonies for generations. The mint began producing America's first official coins: gold eagles, silver dollars, half dollars, quarters, dimes, and copper cents. Every coin had a fixed weight and precious metal content, ensuring that people could trust its value. Unlike the failed continental dollar, the new currency was backed by a carefully designed financial system and the authority of the federal government. For the first time, Americans shared a common national currency. It was more than a coin. It became a symbol of unity, a symbol of stability, and a symbol of a nation determined to build its own future. As the United States expanded westward and its economy grew, so did the importance of the dollar. But the country's financial system would soon face new challenges: bank failures, economic panics, and eventually the bloodiest war in American history would force the nation to reinvent its money once again. By 1861, the United States faced its greatest crisis. The nation had split apart. The American Civil War had begun. It would become the deadliest conflict in American history. But before the Union could win the war, it had to solve a financial problem. Wars are incredibly expensive. The government needed money to pay hundreds of thousands of soldiers, manufacture weapons, build railroads, supply hospitals, and keep the nation functioning. Taxes alone were not enough. Borrowing money became increasingly difficult. Gold and silver reserves were limited. President Abraham Lincoln and Congress needed a new solution. In 1862, they passed the Legal Tender Act. For the first time, the federal government issued a national paper currency that was legal tender for most debts. These notes became known as greenbacks, named after the distinctive green ink printed on their reverse side. Unlike earlier currencies, greenbacks were not immediately redeemable for gold or silver. Their value came from the authority of the United States government and the confidence of the American people. Many were skeptical. Some feared another collapse, like the continental dollar. But the greenbacks succeeded where earlier paper money had failed. They helped finance the Union war effort and kept the economy operating during one of the nation's darkest periods. The Civil War also transformed America's banking system. The National Banking Acts of 1863 and 1864 created nationally chartered banks and introduced standardized banknotes backed by U.S. government bonds. For the first time, Americans across the country could use a more uniform and reliable paper currency. When the war ended in 1865, the United States had preserved the Union, but it had also created the foundation of a modern national financial system. The U.S. dollar was no longer simply a coin made of gold or silver. It had become the financial backbone of a rapidly growing nation. Yet the economy remained vulnerable. In the decades that followed, repeated banking failures and financial panics exposed a dangerous weakness. America still lacked a true central bank capable of protecting the nation's financial system during times of crisis. That weakness would finally be addressed after one of the worst financial panics in U.S. history. By the beginning of the 20th century, the United States had become one of the world's fastest-growing economies. Factories powered the Industrial Revolution. Railroads stretched across the continent. American businesses expanded at an extraordinary pace. But beneath this prosperity, the financial system remained dangerously unstable. Banks operated with little coordination. There was still no central institution capable of responding to a nationwide financial crisis. Then, in 1907, disaster struck. A failed attempt to corner the stock market triggered widespread panic. Rumors spread rapidly. Depositors rushed to withdraw their money. Banks began running out of cash. Businesses struggled to secure loans. The stock market plunged. Within days, the American economy stood on the brink of collapse. At the center of the crisis was one man, J.P. Morgan, one of America's most influential bankers. With no central bank to coordinate a rescue, Morgan gathered leading bankers inside his New York library. Working around the clock, they organized emergency loans, rescued struggling financial institutions, and restored confidence before the crisis spiraled out of control. The panic eventually subsided, but it exposed a serious weakness. The financial stability of the United States had depended on a private citizen, not the government. Many leaders agreed that this could never happen again. The nation needed a permanent institution to safeguard its economy. After years of debate, Congress passed the Federal Reserve Act. On December 23, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson signed it into law. The Federal Reserve System, often called the Fed, became the central bank of the United States. Its responsibilities were clear: maintain financial stability, support the banking system, provide emergency funding during crises, help control inflation, and manage the nation's money supply. The Federal Reserve also became responsible for issuing Federal Reserve notes, the paper dollars Americans use today. Its creation transformed the U.S. dollar into a modern national currency supported by a powerful central banking system. The timing could not have been more important. Only a year later, the world would be consumed by a devastating conflict. A conflict that would shift global economic power and place the U.S. dollar at the center of international finance. When World War I began in 1914, Europe became the center of one of history's most devastating conflicts. Britain, France, Germany, Russia. All the major powers shifted entire economies toward war production. Although the United States remained neutral during the early years of the conflict, American factories supplied food, steel, machinery, ammunition, and equipment to the Allied nations. As Europe spent its wealth on war, gold flowed into the United States. American banks became major international lenders. For the first time, the United States emerged as one of the world's leading financial powers. But an even greater transformation was still to come. In 1929, the Great Depression shook the global economy. The stock market crashed. Thousands of banks failed. Millions of Americans lost their jobs, homes, and savings. The crisis spread far beyond the United States, affecting economies across the world. Then, just a decade later, another global conflict erupted: World War II. Unlike much of Europe and Asia, the American mainland escaped widespread destruction. While other nations rebuilt from ruins, American factories operated around the clock. They produced tanks, aircraft, warships, weapons, and supplies for Allied forces around the globe. By 1945, the United States possessed the world's largest economy and held the majority of the world's official gold reserves. America had become the financial leader of the free world. Recognizing the need for a stable international monetary system, representatives from 44 Allied nations met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, in July 1944. Their goal was to prevent another global financial collapse. The agreement they reached changed history. Most major world currencies would be linked to the U.S. dollar, and the U.S. dollar itself would be convertible into gold at a fixed rate of $35 per ounce. The International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were also established to support global financial stability and post-war reconstruction. For the first time in history, the U.S. dollar became the world's primary reserve currency. Governments stored dollars in their central banks. International businesses conducted trade in dollars. Global confidence in the American economy reached unprecedented levels. The U.S. dollar had become more than America's currency. It had become the financial foundation of the modern world. Yet this new system depended on one critical promise: that every U.S. dollar could still be exchanged for gold. Within a generation, that promise would be tested, and one presidential decision would permanently transform the global monetary system. By the late 1960s, cracks were beginning to appear in the Bretton Woods system. The United States was spending enormous amounts of money on the Vietnam War and ambitious domestic programs. As more dollars entered the global economy, foreign governments began exchanging their dollars for American gold. The problem was simple. There were now far more dollars in circulation than the United States had gold to support. If the trend continued, America's gold reserves could disappear. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon made one of the most important financial announcements in modern history. The United States would suspend the conversion of dollars into gold. The decision, known today as the Nixon Shock, effectively ended the gold standard. For the first time, the U.S. dollar became a fiat currency. Its value would no longer come from gold. Instead, it would depend on confidence in the American economy, the stability of its government, and the strength of its financial institutions. Many feared the dollar would lose its global influence. Instead, something unexpected happened. Its dominance continued to grow. In the years that followed, the United States reached important agreements with major oil-producing nations, especially Saudi Arabia. Oil, the world's most important traded commodity, would be bought and sold primarily in U.S. dollars. This created constant global demand for the American currency. Countries importing oil first needed dollars. Central banks increased their dollar reserves. International trade increasingly relied on the U.S. dollar. Combined with America's deep financial markets, political stability, and economic strength, the dollar remained the world's leading reserve currency. Today, trillions of dollars move through global markets every single day. From international trade and banking to investment and foreign exchange, the U.S. dollar remains at the center of the global financial system. The dollar has continued to evolve. Most money today is no longer physical cash. It exists as digital information inside banks, payment networks, and financial institutions. People buy homes without carrying cash. Businesses transfer billions of dollars across continents in seconds. Online banking, credit cards, smartphones, and digital payment platforms have transformed how money moves around. At the same time, new technologies such as cryptocurrencies and discussions about central bank digital currencies have raised important questions about the future of money. Yet despite these innovations, the U.S. dollar remains the world's most widely used and trusted currency. Its influence extends far beyond the borders of the United States. The story of the U.S. dollar is more than the history of money. It is the story of a nation that transformed itself from 13 struggling colonies into the world's largest economy. It survived revolution, economic collapse, civil war, financial panics, global conflicts, and technological revolutions. From the Spanish silver dollar to the continental dollar, from Alexander Hamilton's vision to Abraham Lincoln's greenbacks, from the Federal Reserve to Bretton Woods, and from the gold standard to the digital economy, the U.S. dollar has constantly adapted to a changing world. Its greatest strength has never been the paper it is printed on, nor the metal from which its earliest coins were made. Its true strength has always been confidence. Confidence in a nation's economy, its institutions, its laws, and its ability to innovate through times of crisis. Whether the future belongs to digital currencies, artificial intelligence, or technologies yet to be imagined, the history of the U.S. dollar reminds us that every currency tells the story of the people who believe in it. And few stories have shaped the modern world more profoundly than the rise of the American dollar. If you enjoyed this documentary, please like, subscribe, and share this video with others who are passionate about history, economics, and the remarkable events that shaped our world.